It's John's gospel, or at least the gospel according to John. Now, I've said it before, and I shall say it again. This is nothing new. Who used to say that? I've said this before. I'll say it again. This is nothing new. A prime minister of this country from many years ago, it was Harold Wilson. Who's old enough to remember Harold Wilson's prime minister? Okay, most people here. Okay, so we'll come back to this. Every time we come to John's gospel, I will probably say it again, because this is the way in. John gives us a key to an understanding of what it's all about. So we, being the first century recipients of the Gospel of John, the letters he wrote round to the communities, we go to the beginning and find the key to what it's all about. Because otherwise, if you start in the middle of the story, as we do now, it can all seem a bit strange. So as we're in John's Gospel, as you've got your Bibles out, we go back to the beginning. Every time we come to John's Gospel, we should go right back to the beginning to remind ourselves what John is saying. What John is saying throughout the whole of his Gospel. It has one simple, clear message, and he repeats it again and again and again in several different ways, but we need the key to really get into it. And if we go right back to the beginning, the word, what's known as the prologue, what we often hear at Christmas, it's the culmination of all the readings we have on the Christmas services, the prologue to John's Gospel. Nice little word there. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word, of course, being Jesus himself. And everything in the Gospel of John follows from that. Everything follows from that. And if we don't get that right at the beginning, we miss so much of what John is trying to say. So top tip for you, anytime you find yourself in or near John's Gospel, go to the beginning. Also, as I think I may have said before, it's useful when you have the Jehovah's Witnesses around, because they don't believe Jesus is God. And you can point them at their own Bibles and say, look, this is the whole point about this part of the Bible, explaining to us that Jesus is God, which then, of course, makes his sacrifice on the cross so much more profound. I'll come back to that in just a moment. So we start off in John's Gospel with the key, an understanding to it. It's not quite a cipher, but if you've got a code or something and you're trying to understand the code, you need the cipher, the key, to understand it. And right at the beginning of John's Gospel, there it is. So anytime you find yourself in John's Gospel, start at the beginning. It'll give you the key to everything he's trying to say to us. The other thing about coming into church and reading the Bible is, first of all, it's a good thing. Don't get me wrong, it's a good thing, reading the Bible in church, okay? But the way we do it is in little bits. We do it in little bits. Maybe we should go through a whole gospel on one occasion. How about that for a bright idea? Everyone's looking at their shoelaces. Okay, but perhaps we should, because we get a full understanding of what's going on. This that Jesus says to his disciples hasn't just come from nowhere. It follows on from a miracle, a very controversial miracle. Jesus has healed a man born blind. A man born blind who would have been despised by the Pharisees, by the elders of the synagogue, and he has healed a man born blind, and the Pharisees have gone, what's gone on with that then? And the man born blind, if you read the previous chapter, has suddenly got more and more bold and started to argue with the Pharisees. And the Pharisees eventually get really, really upset, and they throw this guy out of the synagogue because he's getting so close to saying what John wants us to hear from the word go, that Jesus must have been God. How else could he have performed a miracle like that? And the Pharisees don't want to hear it, so they throw the guy out of the synagogue. Then Jesus comes into the picture and has this discussion in the hearing of the Pharisees. This is definitely for them, but it's also for us too, about who he is, following on from the fact he's just performed a miracle, making someone whole who'd been born blind. So that's the context. We come in on the back of a big argument. And Jesus then says, okay, we're having this argument, but I'm now going to tell you who I am. You've got to listen to this, because this healing miracle was what it was. Right, what I'm going to do is, if you have your Bibles with you, you can see the reading comes in 3 sections, verses 1 to 6, verses 7 to 10, and verses 11 to 15. Let's have a look at the first of those sections before. Now, starts with a comparison between the shepherd and the bandits. Now, comparisons are everywhere. Every so often, once in a while, maybe twice a year, I have a moan. Normally, I'm perfectly sanguine about everything. Don't look at her. Once in a while, I'll have a moan, something that riles me, a little bit of a hobby horse comes in, and I'll say, oh my heavens, here that goes. Don't look at me like that. I'm not going to include you in sermons if you keep looking at me like that. So I do occasionally have a moan. And one of my moans is the way that comparisons are used in advertising. Some time ago, I used to work for a guy who used to write advertising copy, and I know how some of the tricks work. And the one that really, really riles me is when you have something that's the best in class. You ever seen that? Quite often, car adverts will say, and it's got the best in class for something like boot space, or legroom, or headroom. It's hogwash. It's hogwash. They're inventing a comparison, a straw man, to pretend they're better than someone else. It's like when you have, this is the best tow car of the year. Fantastic. Who's awarded it? Well, who's awarded it is Ealing Knitting Circle. There's no point. And these comparisons that come out are very often meaningless. This is the best in class, which means they've invented a class specifically to hide the fact that actually this is the smallest, slowest car out there, but it's best in class. So comparisons rub me up the wrong way when they're comparisons for something that doesn't really exist. However, Jesus here is giving a comparison which does exist. He is giving a comparison with a danger. There's a real danger. It looks about who is the robber, who's coming in to rob the sheep. He's pointing us in the direction of a real danger. The shepherd comes to call his sheep and to look after them. Come back to that in a minute. The robber comes in to do them mischief, take them away. So there is a real comparison going on here that he's pointing out to. Now, remember where we've come from. The context is he's just had a barney with the Pharisees, and he's pointed to them in particular as the robbers, the people who are leading people astray, not looking after them. But here's the thing, sheep. Why pick on sheep? I was at a school many, many years ago. So long ago, we actually had a working coal mine just the other side of the valley. That's how long ago I was at school. Okay, and I was in an area where there were lots and lots of farmers. And so we had a lot of farming lads at our school. And one of the teachers was really getting frustrated at some basic arithmetic and said to one of the lads, look, okay, let's try and do this differently. You have 8 sheep and one of them escapes. How many sheep have you got left? And the lad replied, none. And the teacher, of course, at this point, this is a conversation that's been going on for. To be fair, this lad was possibly trying to wind up the teacher, and no, it wasn't me on this occasion. And it says, well, no, you've lost 1 sheep. How have you got to? And he says, miss, you might know your sons, but you don't know sheep. And of course, if 1 sheep escapes, they all follow, don't they? One sheep goes somewhere, and you only have to go out on the hills in the summer and watch the sheep. 1 is leading and they're all following. And so in this country, we have an understanding of sheep as being a bit thick, don't we? A bit stupid. Much wool on the inside as there is on the outside. But this isn't what Jesus is talking about. This is a different culture. We did this a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Psalm 23, which we just sung again. Actually, in this country, we drive sheep because they're stupid and will just get themselves into trouble. In first century Palestine, a sheep is valued. A sheep is valued and is called. And in this first section, Jesus says something that's really bizarre, but actually would have happened. He calls his sheep by name. He calls his sheep by name. To call someone by name means they're valued. And I apologize again and again and again that I'm really, really, really not good at remembering people's names. And you're going to have to keep telling me, okay? But when you call someone by name, it means you value them. And clearly, sheep were valued. And Jesus wants to get across that as the shepherd, if he's calling himself that, whoever his sheep are, and that's going to be us, and we're not the sheep that are stupid and run away, but we are the sheep who are valued. He calls them by name. The second part of this particular reading is verses 7 to 10. That of the first of the two I am sayings in this particular passage. I am the gate for the sheep. What's the mean? You're a gate. You're a gate. Well, actually, it might seem to us metaphorical. Ah, yes. But actually, in first century Palestine, this would have been a physical thing. Sheep pen, quite big sheep pen, might have had more than one flock in it, which is why Jesus talks about calling his own sheep out by name. And the shepherd would lie across the gateway. All the sheep come in, not the dogs. Okay, the shepherd would lie across the gateway. Large pen, several flocks in it, and at least one of the shepherds would lie across the gateway. And you couldn't come in or get out unless you went through the shepherd, through the gateway. And this is what Jesus is pointing to. Everyone would be familiar with a sheep pen. They're all over the place. And once the sheep had come in the pen for the night, the shepherd would lie across the gateway. No one comes in or out by them. And he's the one then using these same words that actually Jill used earlier, protects. Well, not just Jill, those came in Zoom and from you earlier. Protects and provides for. If you look at these verses between 7 and 10, it's not just that he's a gate that stops people coming in. And he points out that people who came before were the robbers. I think he's having a go at the Pharisees there, okay? But he's pointing out that he himself protects. He himself then also provides abundance. John 10:10, I have come that they may have life in all its fullness and abundance. Sometimes we miss a bit of that, don't we? Or it's not the thing that people see about church. If we were to go out down the street, down the high street that we don't live on, thank you, Jill. I thought we did, but hey ho, it's Barking Road. It's not high street, is it? It might be a high street. We'll leave it where it's just, it's the A124 high street, whatever it is. Okay. And if we were to go up and down the road, asking people what they thought about faith and religion, how many would say life in abundance? How many do you think would come? And I think we and many other faiths, but we in particular who have this promise from Jesus himself, don't put it out there that much, or we're not known for it. Come to church and freeze. Okay, just so you know, the heating has died. For those of you shivering, okay, the heating has actually died. I was down in the boiler room this morning, sitting there going, nope, not playing. So sorry about that. So come to church and freeze. Unfortunately, that's more of the impression we give, whereas actually Jesus is saying, come to me and I will give you life in its abundance. And he proved it time and time again, starting off, of course, with the wedding at Cana, which is my favorite of all the blessing meals. You don't get half blessed by Jesus, do you? You know, half blessed. I've had a 4 out of 10 blessing from Jesus today. You'll say that, do they? He blesses in abundance. And here he gives that promise. So there he is, putting himself as the gateway to the sheep pen. I will be the person who protects in the first instance. And I will also lead. And we heard it in the psalm as well, don't we? This is kind of the other side of Psalm 23. I will lead you to places of abundance and blessing. And so little of that, of what Jesus promises, I think, is what we actually project into the world. And it's not necessarily our fault, it's what people see. But there we go. And then we come to the final part of the passage, verses 11 to 15. And it starts off with those wonderful, wonderful, wonderful words, I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. And he goes on and explains what the good shepherd does. And again, you might think back to when we were looking at Psalm 23 a few weeks ago, and the good shepherd turns out in all weathers to look after the sheep when they'd rather be at home by the fire. The good shepherd puts themselves at risk. The good shepherd here points to genuine danger. Genuine danger. The wolf is a genuine danger in first century Palestine. If you're sheep, in fact, anywhere if you're sheep, the wolf is a genuine danger. And he points to a genuine danger. Now, I was musing on what that might be. Why does he talk about wolf? Clearly, he's talking about an external threat, and maybe he's still moaning at the Pharisees for leading people astray, and actually come this way if you actually want the truth about God. But also there is an internal threat, and a more dangerous threat, and that is our own sinfulness, our own ability, like sheep, to wander off and do our own thing. And it is a real threat. And just as the people outside, wherever they may be, don't necessarily recognize that following Christ is the path into some form of abundance, they don't recognize the danger to themselves. We're actually really good at making up threats that we respond to, rather than dealing with the real threats, the real dangers that come into our life. Our own sinfulness is a real danger. Again, go down this high street that we haven't got, whatever it is, A124, 20 buses a second, and ask people about sinfulness as a threat. And I'm right behind you when you do. They'll say anything, will they? They won't recognize it. But then there are threats that are made up. I had, when I was a young lad, I had a book that I got, and I still got it somewhere, the 99th Emergency. The 99th Emergency. And there's this young lad at school, and he thought of whatever you would do in any emergency. You're attacked by a lion, you do this. You're caught in a cave, you do this. And he had worked out what he would do in any particular emergency, apart from the real emergency that came to him was a school bully. And he had nothing. He had nothing to get out of that at all. He had no strategy. In the same way that we make up threats that we think we can deal with, and yet, for the real threat, the real danger, have no strategy. If you go and buy a new car, if you go and buy a second-hand car from a main dealer, more to the point, okay, you will be offered insurance to cover non-existent threats. There's something called gap insurance. It's a threat that's been made up. It doesn't exist, but they'll try and sell you insurance for a threat that doesn't exist. Oh yes, I'm covered for that. So busy covering for threats that don't really exist, we don't deal with the real threat within ourselves, which is our own sinfulness. We pretend it doesn't exist, we can't see it, or we can't really do anything about it. So this shepherd, he tells in advance what's going to happen. I lay down my life for the sheep. Because the threat is real, the danger is real, and the shepherd will deal with it because he is the good shepherd. I was reading one of the commentaries about this, and so we've got to be careful when we say this stuff. I lay down my life for a sheep. It could sound like he jumps off a cliff going, I love you. I'll be laying down life for sheep. That's not what it's about. It's not what it's about. Of course, we know here, of course, that the danger, the threat, the sin that is what we are in is what he takes away on the cross. Long words coming up, long word alert. Substitutory, you can say it, substitutory, hang on, I didn't even practice, I'm sorry, I've got my reading teeth in. Substitutionary atonement, there we go, long words. What does it even mean? What does it even mean? It means that, of course, Jesus took the punishment and died in our place. Simple gospel message comes out, and here Jesus prophesies what it is. Now, I remember explaining this to someone some time ago and feeling pretty pleased with myself, because although I can't actually say substitutionary atonement, I was explaining it pretty darn well about how Jesus took our sin, like a whipping boy might have done in a posh house or whatever it is. Jesus took the blame. And died for us. And I was doing pretty darn well. And I thought I was really rocking. Billy Graham, eat your heart. I need to say Billy Connolly there. I had to think for a moment. Different sort of performer. Okay, Billy Graham, eat your heart out. I'm pretty good at this. And the person I was talking to was thinking, and I think, oh God, reel them in. It's also cold in here. Reel them in. And they said, that's horrible. What do you mean it's horrible? That's really gross. That's the worst thing I've ever heard. I went, but what did I say wrong? It must be really good. No, he took us in. He said, but that's holy child abuse. And it would have been, but for what we know from where the first few verses of John's Gospel, the prologue, remember, Jesus is God. He's not someone else being blamed. It's not God saying, right, okay, who am I going to put? You? His own son. Because Jesus is God, it's himself on the cross. It's not holy child abuse. And this is why the whole thing works. And I realized I'd missed that bit out, which is why I was actually putting this guy off. I think we got there in the end. Which then comes to the elephant or the sheep in the room. I am. What's God's name? That's unfortunate, isn't it? Here we are worshiping, I have no idea. God's name, of course, in Hebrew, which is where we get it from, is something that sounds a bit like Yahweh, and what it really means in Hebrew is I am. I am, I have been, I am now, and I will be. Basically, if it exists or has ever existed, I am that, I'm everything, and all is in me. That's what it means, I am. And in the Greek, sorry, I didn't do it properly there. In the Greek, there we go, it's ego eimi. And Jesus uses these words, I am, at this point. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. And you'll remember when things like, I am the true vine, I am the way, the truth, and life. All of these are in John's gospel. Remember, good first century Jewish people. We started at the beginning, read the prologue. We know that Jesus is God. We get to the bit where he's using God's name. We go, ha, don't prove it. It's not as easy as that. Some people will have it that Jesus is using God's name and saying, I am. And that is indeed what I think John is trying to get us to believe. But it's more subtle than that. He's getting us to do our own homework. He's getting us to do our own homework on this, while he's still saying to us again and again and again, Jesus is God, so the person on the cross must have been God. We have to do homework because Jesus isn't actually necessarily calling himself God, but actually that's what we're supposed to understand. So if I say I am, I'm not calling the name of God, am I? I am going to the shops. I'm not calling myself God. I am fixing the Land Rover. I'm not calling myself God. I am having a cup of tea. I'm not calling myself God. I am the Good Shepherd. Something different, isn't it? And if you go through when Jesus says, I am, in John's Gospel, before Abraham was, I am the true vine, I am the way, the truth, life, I am the gateway for the sheep, I am the Good Shepherd. He's not saying something that is of little import. He's saying he is something that only God can be. I am something that only God can be. So he's saying he's God. Bit works like when he demonstrates it with power over water. The wedding at Cana, water into wine, walking on water, stilling a storm. He is what only God can be. So we have to do our own homework and work out who he is. And clearly, he is God. He is God. So when you come across these particular sayings or those particular events in the Gospels, particularly in John's Gospel, it's not that Jesus is saying, look, I've got God's name. We have to do some homework and work it out for ourselves. He's saying he's a good shepherd, but surely only God's a good shepherd. He's saying he's the way, the truth, and life, but surely only God's the way, the truth, and life. And that's where the claim comes in, not by just saying I am. You'll be pleased to know I've got to the point in my notes where it says, and your point is. Jill's looking very pleased. And your point is, if we go through the person who is the gateway for the sheep and the good shepherd, we are told in no uncertain terms that the one who protects, blesses in abundance, and dies in our place is none other than God himself. Sylvie.